Thank you, President Officer. And can I start with a moment of consensus and agree with colleagues across the chamber that this has perhaps not been the best advert for this place this afternoon. And actually, Kate Forbes in many ways started it. She was the first to decry it as a petty and puerile debate. And it then became a theme across SNP speeches. And I found that a little bit ironic because, of course, it was the Finance Secretary, Derek Mackay, in his opening remarks who told us that if we voted down this budget, wages would go unpaid and the lights would go out. And that appeared to be the strongest argument he could muster for voting for his budget. In every attempt to argue that substantial investment was going into Scotland's public services rung hollow from Derek Mackay, because for every pronouncement that he tried to make, there is an independent expert telling us that he is about to make £327 million worth of cuts to public services. What was also petty and puerile was then to hear from Marie Todd that to somehow vote against the budget was to vote against any money for mental health. That to vote against the budget means that you are against money for schools. That to vote against the budget meant that you were against any attempt to grow the economy. And then we had Tom Arthur's speech. An impassioned speech with much good things to say about the damage that the Tories are doing to our country. And he crusaded in this speech against the paucity or the apparent paucity of Labour's motion and demanded a more specific motion. Just minutes after Bruce Crawford had told us off for daring to debate the budget at all, which was somehow frustrating the whole scrutiny of the process. Now, I know that Tom Arthur is a good man. I know that he's a socialist. I've heard him say very often how much against cuts he is. What a shame it was, therefore, to hear him refuse to take any interventions, because had he taken some interventions, Labour members would have had the opportunity to remind him of the cuts that Derek Mackay made to his community when it was the SNP that run Renfrewshire Council. And let's just go over. I will let the member in. I will let the member in one moment once I've reminded him of those cuts. Because, of course, it was the SNP in Renfrewshire that cut 200 teachers. It was the SNP in Renfrewshire who cut school buses for children. And it was, of course, the SNP in Renfrewshire who cancelled support for students struggling to get through school. And that's the ones that he actually made. I could read out all the ones that we managed to stop, but that's a terrible record from the SNP. But perhaps the most puerile and pathetic thing we heard in this debate this afternoon was a suggestion from SNP members that somehow you could close your eyes and ignore that there were any cuts at all, when they must see the impact of these cuts in their communities each and every single day. And if they can't see those cuts, then they are simply not doing their jobs properly enough. I'm happy to hear from the Finance Secretary.
Cabinet Secretary Derek Mackay.
Could I just remind Kezia Dugdale that we're in a parliament, not a council chamber, and maybe that's the way this debate should have been conducted this afternoon, and ask, is it not alarming that the Labour leader doesn't recognise that in voting against the budget, it votes against £38 billion on public services and an extra £700 million extra towards public services coming from our budget?
Kezia Dugdale.
I actually think it's very important that Scotland understands the type of Finance Secretary that it has. Now, I just read out a whole list of cuts that he made when he was in charge of his council in Renfrewshire. Here's some ones that he tried to make, but he was stopped from doing. He tried to cut £250,000 from a Homelink service, which supported vulnerable families. He tried also to rapidly increase the care charges that elderly people faced, and he tried to cut classroom assistance and was defeated. That's the type of Finance Secretary that we've got, and that's the reality of the debate that we've had this afternoon. Now, Presiding Officer, I was very fortunate on Sunday afternoon to be able to see Trainspotting 2. Now, in that film, of course, is the story of 4 Edinburgh men living in 1996 in a city distraught by drugs and all the rest of it. It's a first-class film, fantastic cinematography, and what shines through that film is just how beautiful Edinburgh is. But there are 2 castles featured in that film, Edinburgh Castle and Craigmillar Castle. And in the grounds of Craigmillar Castle is Spud's new house. Now, Spud's new house is in Craigmillar and it's been regenerated by the Labour Party. Now, that is a community that is volatile and on the edge, presiding officer, and this is where it matters, because these £327 million worth of cuts are about to undermine all that progress made in Craigmillar. Let's talk about the Venture project. Let's talk about the Venture project. This is a breakfast club. In fact, it's more than a breakfast club. They don't just provide tea and toast in this breakfast club. They knock on the doors of chaotic families. They get the kids out of their beds, they put them in a bus, and they get them to the school gates. When he cuts £327 million out of council services, that's the type of service he's shutting down. It doesn't have to be this way. And there's another project in that community, Craigmillar Books for Babies, that provides critical early literacy services for families between 0 and 3. Another service that is on the knife edge, running from one charity grant to another charity grant. That's the type of service that his government should support. Again, the Neighbourhood Alliance, another project that seeks to protect and advance that community in Craigmillar, is about to go under. And with it will go sporting facilities for vulnerable families. With it will go the community centre. With it will go the Development Trust. It does not have to be this way, and that's the thing that the SNP need to understand. Presiding officer, Derek Mackay, when he was putting his budget together, had two choices to make. He could complain about Tory cuts, but do nothing about them. Or he could complain about Tory cuts and use the powers of this place to stop them. And unfortunately, for the most vulnerable people in our society, Derek Mackay and the SNP went with the former. And Labour are here to say it doesn't have to be this way. This Parliament has the powers to raise enough revenue to stop the £327 million worth of cuts and instead choose to invest in our public services. And our plans would mean the richest few paying their fair share through a 50p top rate of tax on those earning more than £150,000 a year. That's something the SNP used to support, but which the Finance Secretary said he would now only do if the Tory UK government did the same, and they did it first. Not quite stronger for Scotland, presiding officer. And by setting an income tax rate just 1 penny higher than the rate set by Philip Hammond, we can stop the cuts to local services like schools and care of the elderly. We can instead choose to invest, to give our young people a better chance of getting on in life, regardless of their background. We can choose instead to invest in social care, so that more older people can be cared for at home, which will in turn tackle the growing NHS crisis. And we can provide support to the most vulnerable, instead of pulling the rug out from them, which I see in Craigmillar and across Edinburgh every single day. Tonight, this Parliament can unite together to say that there is a different way. And I know members in different parties will not support everything I have called for here today, and will have their own particular concerns about the government's proposals. But I hope they will agree with me that the budget in its current form is unacceptable. We don't have to put the life chances of the next generation at risk by imposing £327 million worth of cuts on communities across the country. There is a better way, and I hope members grasp that opportunity tonight.